Hello and welcome to Mann's Model Moments. At the weekend, the new 2024 ICM catalogue video went live on ICM's website and is also available in PDF format. Now the video is in Ukrainian, so I'm going to pick out the new things for 2024 here. To start out, we'll look at new tooled aircraft, and kicking that off we have a 1/32nd scale biplane, the HS-123. This is an aircraft which I think of in the same light as the Gloucester Gladiator, which ICM also tool in this scale of course, and goes with other similar period aircraft at the time. Next we have one of the real big hitters for this release, the 1/48 scale B-26 Marauder. We do have some advanced renders shown here from ICM of this aircraft, and I imagine it's going to be of a similar quality to their recent Beaufort and Sally, and is also not a million miles away from the latter in terms of size, though the B-26 is chunkier. This is the first new tool of this aircraft in 1/48 scale since 1978, so I think it's going to be very well received. Another aircraft that is likely to please American aircraft enthusiasts is the UH-60L Black Hawk in the Special Operations variant. This has been done before in 1/48 scale, but only as a variant to the 2001 Italieri kit and the ancient 1980s Academy offering, so a brand new version will please many as well, I'm sure. Moving on to vehicles, and ICM's penchant for slightly unusual offerings, we have the Ford GTB, otherwise known as the Burma Jeep. I believe this is the first time it's been recreated in injection moulded plastic in any scale, other kits being either cast or 3D printed resin. Something a bit more recognisable and mainstream now, and another American offering, the Humvee. This has been covered a lot in the past by other manufacturers, but this one is the later M1097A2, which was also the basis for the M1113 ECV and later developments. Again, I'm sure there will be many modern armour modelers who appreciate this. Back to World War II next with the Flak 38 anti-aircraft gun, which we'll also see a few times later on too. We then travel even further back to the late 20s and early 30s with the Model A Phaeton, which were kind of the convertibles of the day. This in 1/24 scale. The next sets of new tools are figures. To kick that off, we start in 1/35 scale with Ukrainian servicewomen in the set War Has No Gender in the Brave Ukraine series, which has 4 female soldiers in various poses. Also in the Brave Ukraine series is a Ukrainian tank crew. Although it's not clear how many figures will be in this at the moment, it'll probably be around the same. Still in 1/35 scale, but going back to World War II again, we start off with Montgomery's staff. Again, it's uncertain how many figures we'll get here as we only have a placeholder photograph. We then have a very interesting and highly unusual set of figures in the set called You Are Important to God, showing a set of British Army soldiers with a priest in prayer before battle. I don't think I've ever seen anything like this before, and I think it'll add a really interesting and unusual twist to a diorama. The next set is a German field kitchen complete with cooks, something I was hoping for after the unboxing video of the last Kraftwagen with field kitchen that I recently did. As this contains the field kitchen as well, however, I'm hoping for a future release where these figures are available just by themselves. Allied World War II modelers are not going hungry either, as ICM are releasing this set, equivalent to the last one we saw for the Germans, a US field stove set complete with cooks too. I think it's great to see these slightly unusual figures which show a different, and slightly more human, side of life in conflict. The last set of figures we get goes down to 1/48 scale, and this is the Japanese pilots and ground crew set. I think these sets from ICM are invaluable for adding a little bit more interest to aircraft displays, and it's not many manufacturers that provide pilots of any sort, let alone pilots on the ground that can create something of a diorama flavour. The last set of new tools are what I've dubbed accessories, as they don't really fit into the other categories very well. They start with a pair of similar releases which might seem quite boring, but will actually probably sell quite well and see a lot of use. The first of these is the US landing mat in 1/35th scale. This is Vietnam era matting, and will fit with quite a few of ICM's current kits, and obviously there's a huge contingent of modelers interested in this era. The next release then is no surprise, as it's the same matting in 1/48 scale, so ICM are covering both the main diorama scale and a big part of the aircraft modelers here too. I wonder if these sets are successful, whether they'll then bring it out in 1/72nd scale too. The next couple of releases are also related to one another, pretty canny, but in 1/48 scale. The first of these being a set for World War II German aircraft armament. I really like sets like these since they open up a range of possibilities for a whole swathe of models that either don't supply armament, have ungainly or incorrect items, or simply don't feature what you had in mind for your project. They have very wide applicability, so I think this will do well. After that is an equally interesting set, Luftwaffe airfield equipment. Once again, it's uncertain exactly what this set will contain, but the chance to add some peripheral interest to an otherwise bland aircraft on a piece of ground presentation is always welcome, so I'm looking forward to what this looks like closer to its release date. The last set steps back up to 1/35th scale and brings us back to the present day as well, with infantry weapons and badges of the Ukrainian armed forces. These go perfectly with all of their other 1/35th scale figures and vehicles, and are ideal for any modeler wanting to portray some element of the current conflict. So that's 19 new tools in total, although as we move on to the next section we will see more of these new tools. So we're now looking at kits with new parts in some form, though I've tried to avoid where items are just sets of other kits. The first of these is its brand new B-26 Marauder, represented as the specific aircraft flak bait. This aircraft holds the record for the most bombing missions survived in World War II by a US Army Air Force bomber, with over 200 to its name. What is even more remarkable is that none of the aircraft's crew was ever killed, despite it being riddled with over 1,000 bullet holes, landing twice with only one engine, as well as losing its electrical and hydraulic systems on several occasions. I think I'd like to get this one. Next of the adapted new tools is the transport version of the MH-60L, the UH-60A. Although this lacks the sinister menace of the Special Forces version that I might be tempted by, this may arguably be the more popular release for the modelling community. For 35th scale vehicles, we also get the cargo version of the new Burma Jeep, which I actually think is the more interesting one this time. Whichever you prefer, I think this almost dual release of the new tools is a smart way to capture more of the market at once. In an almost identical vein, we then have the cargo release of the new M1097A2 Humvee. This time I think I actually prefer the base vehicle, but then again I'm not really a modern armour modeller, and those of you who are I am sure will be happy to have the choice. Next up we have the new Flak 38 together with a dedicated crew. I actually think having crewed and uncrewed variants is not a bad idea, since if you just want the base gun for a display, you're not paying for parts you don't use, but if you want figures for a diorama, you don't have to get other figures for it unless you choose to. Last of the new tools with new parts is another version of the Model A Phaeton, though I am not enough of a car expert to tell you what the difference is between this and the prior version. Moving to older tools with new parts, though the first of these was only first released last year, the CH-54 Sky Crane in 1/35th scale. This was released in 2023 as the base kit, and also with the huge M121 bomb, but this time we get the enormous Universal Military Pod with it, which again I think might appeal to diorama builders. Next is an adaptation of a 2015 original tool of the JU-88A5 kit, which has been released as several different variants over the past 9 years with various additional parts. This time we get the P1 anti-tank version, featuring a 75mm cannon and produced in small numbers mid-war. As the P2 to P4 variants all use the same airframe with different, and actually more effective, armament, we could see these in the future as well. Sticking with 1/48 scale World War II aircraft, we have another boxing of the Beaufort, this time as the bomber, but details on exactly what this will feature aren't very clear at the moment. We then get our only 1/72nd scale aircraft release in the form of the 2016 tooling of the Focke-Wulf FW189A, but with new parts to make the C version, which competed for the RLM's tender for a specialised ground attack aircraft at the start of the war. I believe the only other kit of this in 1/72nd scale is by Special Hobby, so this should make this weird looking prototype more generally available. Hopping over to 1/35th scale vehicles now, and first up is the Burger Panther with Panzer IV turret, a modification to their 2005 Panther D tooling. We then have two modifications to the Hanomag half-track, first released in 2018. The first is the 251/18, an observation vehicle conversion, which comes complete with crew figures. The second is a further adaptation of the 2023 Kranken Panzerwagen, with a set of field medics, something that I was really hoping that ICM would do. Again, I'd like to see the crew figures released separately on their own. The next release combines an original 2010 tooling, 2012 new parts, and 2024 new parts for the multi-A truck with Flak 38. ICM are really very good at taking a tooling and adapting it with new parts to other purposes, as this shows, this being the 7th iteration we've seen of the original truck. Staying with World War II Germany in 1/35th scale, we have the 2015 Horch 108 Type 40 with new parts to create the KFZ 70 with MG34. We then swap to the Allies for Monty's Leyland Retriever, based on the 2021 base tooling, and obviously to make the most of the newly tooled Montgomery Staff figure set. Sticking with Allied trucks, we have the US truck with field service kitchen, obviously adapted to house the new field stove set. This is then followed by an even more interesting and unusual release in the British Army Mobile Chapel. And again, this is obviously to go with the former Prayer Before Battle new tool figures, and is a really unusual addition. Another 1/35th scale release is the Studebaker gasoline truck, based on the former 2007 main truck tool. We then have the US 6 U3 truck, but this time in German service, I imagine adapted from the release in 2023 with new parts for that version. We then step back in time to World War I, but stay with the US, and we have the ammunition truck version of the FWD Type B truck, tooled in 2019. Again, I think I prefer this over the original version. Now bringing us straight back into the 21st century is the 2023 Ukrainian Kozak 2, but this time as a state border guard variant. We then stay with 1/35th scale in the Ukraine. We then have a rather enigmatic set entitled Danger Mines, which we have almost no information on beyond this picture, which appears to show a truck with a sapper, so I presume we will get some new figures to go with the ZIL, but I may be off the mark here, so we'll just have to wait and see. Speaking of the ZIL, we also have a Ukrainian military box truck version of the 2014 original tooling of the ZIL 131, supplied complete with a driver. We finish the 1/35th scale releases here with a rather sporty looking civilian cabriolet version of the Mercedes 320, first tooled in 2016 as a German staff car. Speaking of German staff cars, the last of the releases with new parts is the 1/24th Type G4, first tooled in 2013, but here it is with MG34s and a set of German staff personnel. Now that's all for this year, but ICM also give us a long view into 2025. The first of these long-range looks is for the 1/48 scale Henschel HS-129, which would be a very welcome kit since the only companies to have done this aircraft in this scale are the defunct Eschi in 1977 and Hasegawa in 1999, so a widely available new tool would be really good and long overdue. Next is one that several people expressed interest in after seeing the 1/48 scale kit, and that's the 1/35th scale UH-60A. The only other tooling of this is the 2001 Academy kit, so I think this again would be a hit for many aircraft and 1/35th scale diorama builders alike. Lastly is a 1/72nd scale version of the current huge 1/35th scale CH-54A Sky Crane. This would certainly be a more manageable model for those interested in this aircraft, though it's not really my thing and I shudder to think of its spindly little legs in this scale. And that brings us to the end of the catalogue, which you can see for yourselves on the ICM video and website, which I'll link below. So what did I think of this release? Well, as I mentioned in my prior videos, I was disappointed on the airfix release, and yes, I did make a mistake and omit 6 reissues in my numbers on the explanation video, which lessens the depth of the disparity, though it is still a light release, but not the main point or the feeling. This for me is the opposite. ICM have got some really nice releases here across a broad range of modelling interests, though 1/72nd scale has largely been ignored. If you're a larger scale aircraft or an AFV modeller, do figures and dioramas, or have an interest in older cars, there's a lot here. Various time periods and scales, 1/48th, 1/35th, 1/32nd, 1/24th are all served, and the subjects range from the popular to the obscure. Notably, there is little to please naval modellers, though ICM has never been strong in this regard, so there's unlikely to be many people looking at this release for that. In fact, in many ways this does everything the airfix release does not, and if you combine airfix and ICM's release as one, then we've got a lot of modelling goodness to look forward to from just these two companies. For me, I think the standout release is the Marauder, in a similar vein to the Mitsubishi Ki-21 Sally and Bristol Beaufort, but just cranked up a notch. If you're a modern military helicopter fan, then it's obviously going to be one iteration of the Black Hawk, and the HS-123 is a bit of an oddball which no doubt will still have its fans. Armour modellers don't have a huge amount of new AFVs here, but there is plenty for those looking at military vehicles rather than just tanks. I like that many of the releases have enough about them to make them different or unique, like the Burma Jeep, Montes Retriever and the Mobile Chapel. The figure and accessory releases add a lot of potential for those modellers who don't see something they desire in the main ranges, and although there's clearly a huge amount for diorama modellers, there's plenty here for those of us who just want to add a bit more interest to our scenes with pilots, ground crew or equipment, for example. A total of 19 new tools is staggering, and even if you ignore all the figures and accessories, it's 7 new main kits, with 26 other releases featuring some sort of new parts or scheme, with 6 of those being iterations of these brand new tools. I've also excluded all the different boxings and the diorama sets, which are new, but they're just different boxings of existing kits, which is also how I treated the airfix release. So is this a good release? Definitely. Is it better than airfix's? Well, I think that's the wrong question. I think this, in some respects, is a more broadly appealing release for modellers, since it covers a whole range of scales, subjects and periods. But actually looking at airfix's release and ICM side by side, they couldn't be more chalk and cheese. By my counting, which as I said excludes certain things, airfix announced 33 releases, including the 6 I missed, and even if we assume they gear up and do 150% of the surprise announcements they did last year, they will just get to the same number of 42 as they did in the past 2 years. ICM come in this year with 45, and I've been pretty harsh at excluding a lot of those new boxings. Now for airfix, 23 of those 33 releases, or 70%, are 1/72nd scale, with 6 being 1/48th, about 20%, and 1 each of 35th and 24th scale, which is about 3.5%. In contrast, 1 of ICM's releases is 1/72nd, 10 are 1/48th, which is about just over 20%, 30 are 1/35th or 65%, 3 are 1/24th, and a single 1/32nd scale for about 10% in total. So these are very different but also very complementary releases. If we look over them as modellers as to what we're being offered, it's a broad range. It's a lot in each category. I think it also highlights what I mentioned before in the airfix release. It's not that airfix had a bad release, it just felt a little light, because it was, and it felt very monopurposed, because it was. If you are a 1/72nd aircraft modeller, it was your year. If not, then not so much. So it lacked the more balanced feel of prior years. In contrast, ICM's release is skewed in just as an extreme manner towards 1/35th scale, but the spread over subjects make it feel less monopurposed. I think because ICM are also a smaller, less well-known company too, there aren't the same expectations placed on them as we have of a major manufacturer like Airfix, Revell or Tamiya. I do think, though, this 2024 lineup is a really good one, and if everything is released as presented, it'll be a good year for ICM. Taken together with Airfix's release, As modelers, even with just these two companies' announcements so far this year, we already have almost 30 new tools, and a host of breadth and interesting subjects, and we should really celebrate that. That's all for this instalment of Mann's Model Moments. If you enjoyed the video, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel for more like it, and share this video with others you think would also enjoy it. You can also follow me on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook, and if you're feeling generous, then I also have a Patreon, which is absolutely the best way of helping me to grow the channel and produce more content like this. With that, I hope you have plenty of modelling moments of your own, and I look forward to welcoming you in the next video.